Hello everyone, welcome to the daily editorial analysis brought to you by Shankar IAS Academy, 28th January 2025. Displayed here are the list of articles that we will be discussing today. The first article, First Resort. The article is taken from the newspaper The Hindu. In this topic, we will be discussing the deportation policy of the newly formed Trump administration in the United States. And under that, we will be discussing what is that policy and its impact in the global level and its impact on India. And the second topic, health of the states. In this topic, we will be discussing the Fiscal Health Index released by NITI Aayog, and in this we will be discussing the key findings of the Fiscal Health Index, and the article is taken from the newspaper Indian Express. So without much delay, let's get into the discussion. Before getting into the discussion, there is an important announcement from Shankar IAS Academy. Shankar IAS Academy's UPSC mock interview 2024 will be held in the following days. Do register and get an opportunity to be evaluated by the former UPSC board members. Now let us begin our discussion with the first article. First Resort. The article is taken from the newspaper The Hindu, which is talking about the deportation policy of the newly formed Trump administration in the United States of America. When Trump came to power, he gave a promise that he will take strict measures against the migration issues. And one of the policies he has taken is mass deportation of different nationals from different nations staying in the United States of America. And followed by the mass deportation, there was a diplomatic and eventually an economic crisis between the United States of America and the Colombian government. The Colombian government under President Gustavo Petro did not grant permission to two US airplanes carrying migrants to land in Colombia. And followed by that, the United States administration responded with increasing the tariff on Colombian goods by 25%, and in response to that, the Colombian government increased the tariff on the US goods by 50%. And the US also imposed sanctions on Colombian financial institutions and banking, and also restricted the traveling freedom of Colombian officials in the United States. And we can see how this deportation policy has sparked a diplomatic crisis between two important nations in the Western Hemisphere. So in this context, we are going to discuss more about the deportation, and then we are going to see what are the major features of this deportation policy under the Trump administration. Then we will see what is the difference between a migrant and a refugee, and in final we will also see certain important agreements signed in the international level to deal with the problem of refugee crisis. So without much delay, let's get into the discussion. So before getting into the discussion, I have a question for you, that is, what is meant by deportation? Deportation is actually a process of sending back nationals to their own homeland. So sometimes you can see certain nationals will illegally enter into another nation. So in this case, the host nation has power to deport those nationals back to their nation. And if the foreign nationals are doing something against the integrity or the security of the host nation, in that cases also the host nation can send back such nationals back to their homeland. So I hope you understand what is meant by deportation. That means it is a process of sending back the nationals to their own homeland. And to understand why this mass deportation is happening in the United States of America, then you should know a short history of the Western Hemisphere. See, this is the Western Hemisphere of the world, okay? And this region was actually discovered by Christopher Columbus and his crew in the year 1492. And after that, the Spanish power came to an end, and 13 British colonies were established in the eastern part of the United States of America. And eventually the 13 colonies revolted against their motherland, and that is known as the American War of Independence. And after that, America formed an independent government. The 13 colonies formed an independent government, and eventually they started expanding towards the west. They destroyed the local communities, the native communities, and they purchased certain land in the south. They purchased Alaska from the SARS government in the late 19th century. And you can also see the America went through the American Civil War in 1860s, in the late 19th century. And America played a very important role in First World War, Second World War, and after the Second World War, Cold War started. And what happened, the world was divided into two different blocks, and America became a superpower in the post-war world. And that America and Soviet Union, there was a race between these two nations to become the next superpower. But in the year 1991, the Soviet Union was collapsed, and America became the only superpower of this 21st century. So you can see what happened is that there was a huge economic divide between the nations in the Western Hemisphere. For example, if you take the certain nations like Canada and the United States, they have economic growth, technological development, achievements, and opportunities. But on other side, the nations south to America, that is Mexico, the nations in the Caribbean islands, the nations in the Latin America or then the South America are struggling from a lot of problems, including crime, political instability, economic instability, ethnic violence, and other social tensions. For example, if you take the Venezuela itself, Venezuela was considered as a model nation, but eventually, they had very good, food security policy, they had education policy, and but since 2008, Venezuela slowly became a victim of Dutch disease. So you can search the word Dutch disease on Google. So what is meant by Dutch disease in economy? So you will get to know what is Dutch disease in economy. So this term will be very useful. Sometimes you can expect this kind of terms in prelims as well. So what happened is that after the Dutch disease, the Venezuela started facing a huge economic crisis, and followed by the economic crisis, there was a migrant issue. That means a large population migrated to the north, to Canada and United States of America. And this Venezuela migrant crisis was considered as one of the major migrant crisis in the recent times. So I hope you understand why this mass deportation is happening in United States of America. So not only from Venezuela, the people from Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, El Salvador, Mexico, they're all migrating to America for better hope and for better opportunities. And this has created a lot of tensions within United States of America. So what are the features of this Trump deportation policies? First one is going for mass deportation. That means the Trump, he cancelled the humanitarian parole program in United States of America, and so as per this humanitarian parole program, the people from other nations in the Western Hemisphere, people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, El Salvador, they can work in United States for 2 years under a recognized authority, and they can make certain income. And this program was cancelled by Trump administration. And the United States also had a migrant settlement, a refugee settlement program that was launched in the year 1986, and this was also cancelled by the Trump administration for indefinite time. And we don't know when they will revive this program again. And before that, there was an order in the United States that the deportation policies or the deportation exercises should not be carried out in health sector, in education institutions, and in religious institutions. But the newly formed Trump administration has revoked this ban. And this mass deportation is targeting undocumented migrants, especially the migrants from Latin American nations. And the use of military planes. For example, we know that the use of military, Trump administration, according to the recent report from Al Jazeera, Trump has asked the armed forces to help the federal agents in deportation activities in the southwestern border of United States, that means with Mexico. And the use of military planes, they used military planes to deport the migrants from Colombia and Brazil. And this has created diplomatic tensions and economic problems, just now we discussed. And strict border controls, that is implementing program policies like Remain in Mexico, or increased border wall construction to prevent the illegal migration of people from Mexico. And the next is family separation policy. That means hereafter, there was hereafter, if you take birth in United States, if your parents should not be a temporary resident in the United States, at the same time you should not be, your parents should not be an illegal migrant in the United States. If they are an illegal migrant or a temporary resident, then the newly taking babies will not, the new child will not get United States citizenship hereafter. And this has created a lot of legal and ethical issues related to the Trump administration's deportation policy. And the next is sanctions on nations. We know in the case of Colombia itself, the diplomatic crisis eventually paved way for economic problem between the two nations. The America went for increasing tariff on Colombian goods, sanctions on other side. Colombia also imposed the sanctions and increased the tariff on American goods. Coming to the global impact of the deportation policy, first one is strained diplomacy. So hereafter, there's a possibility of a strained diplomacy between United States and various other nations. For example, just now we witnessed the problem with Colombia, and they are also taking strict measures against Mexico. So therefore, in the future, there may be a diplomatic issue between the United States and other nations in the Latin America, and this will also impact India. For example, the India is the third largest diaspora and illegal migrant group in United States of America. So this has created a lot of tensions regarding the Indian migrants in India as well. We will discuss what will be the impact on India as well, and the next is raising concerns related to human rights. That means we know that the military is being used in the deportation exercises. Therefore, there is a possibility of mistreatment of the migrants. And the next is rise in illegal crossings. For example, we know why the people migrated from other parts to United States for better opportunity and better hope, right? But now the United States is sending back them. So in the future, there is a possibility of a double strong rebound from other nations. And the next is refugee policies impact. So followed by the United States. So when other nations came to know that the United States are sending back the people, the other nations are also going for tightened immigration policies due to the deportation policy from the United States. And the next is economic fallout. So the deportation policy has a potential to a disruption in the global trade. For example, we know they have the policy has created economic tension between the Colombia and the United States. At the same time, also created problem with the other nations, including Mexico and Brazil. And we know that the India is the third largest illegal migrant population in the United States. Therefore, it has a potential to threaten the Indo-US relations, especially in the field of service sector and export and import. Now we are going to see the impact of this policy on India. First one, India is the third illegal migrant group in United States, followed by Mexico. They're standing at the first, and in the second rank, it is the people from El Salvador. And visa restrictions has been imposed. So that means restrictions on H1B visas will definitely impact the Indian professionals working in the service sector in United States. And also this will raise concerns about the other workers and the Indian students studying in the United States. And the next is IT sector hit. We know that India is very good at providing services. Therefore, this deportation policy has a potential to impact the economic relation between the two nations, and this can disrupt the opportunities for the Indian professionals in the United States. And the next is, we know that we have concluded a lot of trade as well as trade agreements and agreements on critical technology with the United States. And the next is repatriation issues. That means we know the policy has raised concerns regarding the safety and reintegration of the Indians in United States. At the same time, there are challenges related to the reintegration of the Indians, followed by the deportation policy and the trade relation. So we know that what happened in the case of Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. So here also there will be a potential tension between the United States and the India in the future related to this deportation, and this can bring a downfall or a setback in the sectors of technology and services. And next is policy. So like other nations, India is also going for strict immigration policy, followed by the deportation policy in the United States of America. Now we are going to see the difference between migrant and refugee. So what is a migrant? Migrant is a person who voluntarily moves from his nation to another nation in irrespective of reasons. For example, he may be moving for a better opportunity, for employment, or for better income, or for better life standard. But that is not the case of the refugee. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention, refugee is a person who is fleeing the nation out of fear. So that may be due to persecution, war, disaster, etc. And in the case of the protection, coming to the case of the protection, the refugees has protected under the international laws, while in the case of migrants, they are under the protection of the national laws. Or for example, if a person is migrating from India to United States, then his protection is under the responsibility of the United States of America. And coming to the rights of the refugees has rights, and it is supported by the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. And that is not the case of the migrants. They are regulated by, their rights are regulated by the host nations. And in the case of return, migrants can return safely to their nations in if that in usual cases, but in the case of refugees, it is not easy. They fled the nation because of fear only. Therefore, returning back to their homeland is very difficult for them. Now we are going to see certain important agreements related to international agreements related to refugee crisis or refugee management. First one is the 1951 Refugee Convention. So you have to note the year 1951, and it was it was signed after the Second World War. So this grants certain rights to the refugees, including legal protection, right to work, right to education, and right to non-refoulement. That means the host nations cannot send back the refugees back to the danger. And you have to note this was signed in the post-war world. Therefore, it gave more focus in Europe and the refugees in the Europe. And later, the scope of this convention was expanded by 1967 protocol. And you have to note in the case of this, India is not a signatory to this 1951 Refugee Convention. And the next we have the 1967 protocol. This was done to expand the scope of this 1951 Refugee Convention, and this is removing certain geographical limits. That means that the first Refugee Convention, that is 1951 Refugee Convention, was focusing on Europe only, and they are focused only on the migrant the refugee crisis in the Europe. But now it is removing the geographical limit, and it is going beyond the space and time, and it extends the refugee protections globally. And this convention, this protocol encourages more nations to join the convention. And in the case of India here also, India is not a signatory to this protocol, but India is taking case by case a refugee approach. And we know that we gave asylum to a lot of communities from other countries. For example, we gave asylum to the Tibetan population in the late 1950s and 60s, and this was one of the granting of asylum to the Tibetan refugees was one of the major reasons behind the Indochina tension in 1960s. And we gave asylum to the Sri Lankan people during the Sri Lankan civil war. We gave asylum to the Rohingya people during the time of the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. And so India is not even though India is not a member to these important conventions, we have taken a lot of humanitarian aid and service. We have given a lot of humanitarian aid and services to the people who left their nation out of fear and persecution. The next is Global Compact on Refugees, and this was signed in the year 2018 and adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. And this provides framework for shared responsibility related to refugee management, and it is focusing on refugee inclusion, providing them self-reliance through better education and employment opportunities. Here also India is endorsed by the agreement, but we are not legally bound to this compact. So in this topic we discussed the deportation policy in United States and what are the features of this and what will be the global impact of this policy, and then we will show how the deportation policy will impact the India, and what will be the difference between migrants and refugees, that also we saw. And then we discuss some of the important agreements related to refugee crisis signed in the global level, and based on our discussion try to answer this mains practice question. The question is, India hosts many refugees despite not signing the 1951 Refugee Convention. Discuss the need for a formal refugee policy. So this question is asking about the importance of a formal refugee policy that we need. We know that the Foreigners Act, and we have something called the Foreigners Act in 1946, but that is not giving a clear clarity between the migrant and the refugee. So we need a formal refugee policy for various reasons. But at the same time, you have to note that yes, India hosts many refugees despite not signing the 1951 convention. Yes, like I said, we gave asylum to the Tibetan population, we gave asylum to Rohingyas, we gave asylum to the people from Sri Lanka, and we also gave asylum to people from Afghanistan and Pakistan. But at the same time, we need a formal refugee convention. So this is asking about the importance of a formal refugee convention, formal refugee policy. So we can see that we can take, there are a lot of reasons. First of all, it gives a clarity between a migrant and refugee. At the same time, it enhances our value. We know that India is following a principle called Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, which means one world, one family. And so we can strengthen our value. At the same time, we can prevent arbitrary action against the refugees. So we know that because of the lack of because of the absence of a formal refugee policy, there will be a possibility of an arbitrary action from the government against the refugees. So if we have a refugee agreement or a refugee policy, then we can act according to the provisions mentioned in the policy. So these are the importance of a formal refugee policy. So this is a 250 words question you have to write for nearly 3 pages, and you can address challenges too, in regarding framing a formal refugee policy, and it is a 50 marks question, and you have to write the answer, post it in the comment section. We will review and we will reply for your answer. Now we will move to the next topic. Health of states. The article is taken from the newspaper Indian Express. This article is talking about the physical health index released by NITI Aayog, and a few days back there was an article in Hindu newspaper which was talking about the same index, and we know that the state of Odisha is on top in this index. But this index identified 2 major issues. First one was the growing debt to GDP ratio, and the next is growing disparities between the Indian states. So without much delay, let's get into the discussion. NITI Aayog's physical health index, this index evaluates 18 major states in India under 5 important indicators. First one is physical prudence. That means the government's ability to manage the finance responsibly. And the next one is debt index and sustainability. That means it is the ability of the government to maintain current and long-term debts. And the next is revenue mobilization. It refers to the ability of the government to collect tax. And the next is quality spending, and the next is stabilization of state finances. And this framework, this physical index not only identifies top performance, but it also points out the states lagging in performance. At the same time, it also talks about areas where we need improvements. And coming to the another data, that is top performance are the states of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Goa, and Jharkhand and Gujarat, while bottom performance are Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, Kerala and Haryana. And coming to the debt to gross state domestic product. So in the beginning I mentioned a term, that is debt to GDP ratio. So to find this, we have an equation, that is the total debt of the government divided by the GDP into 100. So this is the equation we have to find. This debt to GDP ratio, and if the debt to GDP ratio is very high, that means the government is not in a position to manage the finance, or there is a high liability on the government, or we can also assume that the government is not in a position to repay the debt. So high debt to GDP ratio is not healthy. And in the case of top performance, you can see in the state of Odisha, the ratio is just 16.3%, and in the case of Gujarat, the ratio is 17.9%. While in the case of bottom performance, the highest is in Punjab. Punjab has the ratio of 46.6%, which means the government is not responsibly managing the finance, or we can also assume that the government is they have too much debt, or they are not in a position to take further debts or repay the present debts. So high debt to GDP ratio is not healthy. It's not fiscally healthy. And coming to the key issues that are affecting the physical health in India, first one is the rising debt to GDP ratios, like I mentioned, in the states of West Bengal and Punjab. So if there is high debt to GDP ratio, then the economy is not doing good, or they have some sort of burden. And the next is unproductive expenditures of the government. For example, expenditure on freebies and other populist scheme, which will get you more votes, but will not be that much productive. And the next is loss-making DISCOMs. That means even though we have taken a lot of steps like Ujjwala DISCOM Assurance Yojana, still the DISCOMs are not able to perform as we expected, and it is creating huge loss. And the next is dependence on borrowing. For example, if there is a high borrowing, then definitely the debt to GDP ratio will be high. And we know that the borrowings are always liability, because we have to pay the interest. And even if you take the budget of the national government or the state governments, we can see one of the biggest expenditure will be interest payment, and therefore higher interest liabilities will be there, and this can reduce fund for developments. And the next is inefficient revenue mobilization or challenges associated with revenue mobilization. This includes weak tax collection and GST inefficiencies. And the next we have the dependence on central transfer, and so the states are more depending on central fund from the central government. But if there is any unpredicted issues, economic crisis, then definitely this fund transfer will be affected, and that will bring more impact on the state governments. Moving on, the second major issue identified by the index was the growing disparities between the states, that is economically, fiscally, and socially. So what will be the reason? So some of the states like Gujarat, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, they are performing well, while other states like Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand and Bihar, they are lagging behind. So what will be the reasons? First major reason is the geographical differences. The states with the access to port or the coastal states are thriving, while states with landlocked states are struggling. That means we are not able to explore the opportunities in the landlocked states. And historical inequities. That means we know that the British people, the British ruled the India for nearly 250 years, and you can see the colonial policies were based on divide and rule policy. They divided the people and then ruled India, and you can see they favored certain areas with the huge economic opportunities. For example, the coastal cities example, we can see that Bombay, Madras, Calcutta, initially they developed all these cities, but they did not give that much importance to the northwestern part of India or the northeast part of India, or that much importance to the central India as well. And the next is resource allocation gap. That means there is a controversy between the state governments and central government that sometimes the central government is giving more fund to the developed nations rather than developing nations, underdeveloped states. So these kind of allegations are there. So this can sometimes bring resource allocation gaps. And the next is governance challenges. This includes persistence of corruption, poor administration in the lagging states. For example, states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and other the states lagging behind in this index may face all these problems. And we know that this will eventually affect the governance and the public trust in the government institutions. And the next is economic dependence on agriculture. For example, the Bimaru states itself, they are depending more on agriculture, and these agriculture states do not have sufficient infrastructure development, and they are also at the high risk of financial instability and other threats posed by the climate change. And the next is low industrialization. So if there is low industrialization, there will be less economic employment opportunity. If there is less employment opportunity, less income. If there is less income, less productivity and less growth. Therefore, the low industrialization in certain parts can lead to limited regional growth. And then finally, poor human capital. This is due to the weak education system and the persistent health problems in India. For example, the malnutrition. And if you take the education itself, you can see skill mismatch between the a person and the market. So these kind of issues can bring lack of opportunity to utilize our human capital, and eventually that will also result into poverty, unemployment, and other social and economic crises. So these are the major reasons behind the growing disparities between the Indian states. So in this topic, we discussed the key findings of the fiscal health index released by NITI Aayog. And based on our discussion, try to answer this mains practice question. The question is, examine the causes of regional disparities in India and suggest measures to address them for achieving balanced regional development. So the causes we already discussed, that is low productivity, low industrialization, historical reason, that means the British rule based on divide and rule policy, and then we discussed the problem associated with the agriculture state. So these are the causes behind the growing disparities between the Indian states. So suggesting measures. So how can we achieve a balanced regional development? So we know that India is going for a lot of infrastructure development programs like Bharatmala and Sagarmala. So these kind of infrastructure projects are going on the side, and we also have many economic act. For example, we have FRBM to ensure long-term economic stability. So we can utilize all these provisions in this act, and then we are concluding a lot of agreements with other nations for more investment and to open more opportunities in our economy. So these are the and also we have a lot of socio-economic welfare schemes. You can address 1 to 3 socio-economic welfare schemes if possible. So based on our hints, try to answer this mains practice question and post it in the comment section. We will review and reply for your answer. And here also it is a 15 marks question, and you have to write around 250 words. That means around 3 pages. Post it in the comment section. We will review and we will reply for that. With this, we are coming to the conclusion for today's editorial analysis. If you like the video, hit the like button, give your feedbacks as comments, and share this content with your friends. And before leaving this channel, don't forget to subscribe and also hit the bell icon to receive on-time update from Shankar IAS Academy. Thank you. Have a nice day.